My son's wife suddenly told me she didn't want me around because she didn't like anything about me and wanted to live alone with her family. Those words hit me hard, reminding me of when I had to leave my own parents' home. Anger surged within me at the idea of being pushed out again. I decided to leave, gathering my things. That was it. I vowed never to forgive her. It was time to act on my plan. My name is Sandra Clark, and I'm turning 61 this year. Although I'm technically retired, I'm still fortunate enough to have a job. I don't go to the office every day. Instead, I work mostly from home. My oldest son seems to think I've stopped working altogether. I became a widow in my 40s. I currently live with my oldest son and his wife in our old family home, which has a large property. Despite its issues, I really love the place, which made the idea of moving out quite tough. Financially, I've never had much trouble. Most of the insurance payout from my late husband remains untouched, providing a worry-free lifestyle for my twilight years. However, despite this seemingly carefree life, I do have concerns, mainly revolving around my oldest son's wife, Jessica. She has a strong personality and frequently clashes with me, a dynamic that began when she first announced her intention to marry my son. I vividly remember her casual attire during our first meeting, which she claimed was to show her true self. But to me, it seemed disrespectful. Jessica is highly argumentative and articulate, making it challenging to navigate conversations with her. I'd often wonder why my son chose her as his partner, only to later learn that she was the one who pursued him. Despite her sometimes outrageous behavior, she possesses a striking beauty that, I suspect, captivated my somewhat naive and sheltered son from the start. Even after they got married, Jessica's behavior remained consistent. To put it kindly, she's not pretentious, but to be frank, she often seems to lack common sense in her actions. I strongly considered opposing their marriage, but I reminded myself that it was what my son wanted, so I kept my patience. However, the outcome of their marriage has led to the situation we're facing now. Initially, my son insisted that we continue living together in our family home after the wedding. I had expected Jessica to object, but surprisingly, she was also in favor of it. It soon became evident why she agreed. Despite being a full-time housewife, Jessica never contributed to household chores. She left everything, cleaning, laundry, meal preparation, solely to me. What's more, she quit her job at the time of the marriage, while I continued to work remotely, leaving me with less free time than her. When I'm working at my computer, Jessica often makes belittling comments, suggesting that I'm just goofing off. Initially, I laughed it off to avoid arguments, but it started to bother me over time. Once, when Jessica was lounging and watching TV, I asked her if she could help with the cleaning. Instead of agreeing or politely declining, she made a disgusted face, sighed dramatically, and explained that she doesn't do housework for my sake. According to her unique theory, if she did the chores, it would deprive me of my only job, which she believes would lead to a sedentary lifestyle and potential health issues like dementia due to lack of stimulation. In simpler terms, Jessica's illogical reasoning of not doing any housework herself, claiming it's for my benefit, was incredibly frustrating. Her comment about living together to ensure I don't slack off left me speechless. I deeply regretted agreeing to this arrangement. Every day felt like torture, constantly doing chores while being watched by Jessica. I reached my breaking point and decided to talk to my eldest son, not to complain about Jessica, but to explain the difficulties I faced in our current home. Due to the old layout of the house and my back issues from last year, I realized it was time for a change. I didn't want to feel pushed out by Jessica, but I knew I needed to prioritize my well-being. So I decided to move to an apartment where I could live alone. Although the new place might be a bit too large for just me, I made sure to rent a room big enough for my grandchildren to stay over in the future. After customizing the interior to my liking, I finally felt like I had my own little castle. However, my happiness didn't last long. Jessica started visiting every day, staying until late at night. She lounged on the couch in my new apartment, commenting on its size and suggesting I return to our old home to do the chores for my health and longevity. It's unbelievable how self-centered she can be, and it's incredibly frustrating. I've already moved out for my well-being, and her suggestion is absurd. I reminded her that I've taken care of everything in the apartment, and my health checkups have been fine. But she simply ignored me, turning her head away as if my words were insignificant. It's maddening how she always ignores anything that inconveniences her. Despite my reminders, Jessica continued her usual strategy of ignoring inconveniences and kept visiting my apartment every day. Just recently, she even ended up staying the night, claiming it was too much hassle to go back to her own place. My parents' home and this apartment are just a 15-minute walk apart, and it was my eldest son who suggested I live near them due to his concern for me. While his gesture touched me, it was still hard to leave the old house. One day, when I returned from a rare business-related outing, I was shocked to find Jessica lounging in my apartment as if it were her own. To my disbelief, she had used the spare key I gave to my son without my knowledge. "Ah, welcome back," she said casually from the floor in front of the TV, not even bothering to get up. I felt uneasy realizing she had been in my apartment without my consent or knowledge. While I was away, I finally stood up to Jessica sternly, a departure from my usual quick-to-forgive demeanor. She seemed surprised, as she was used to my usual anger dissipating quickly. When she called me a stingy mother-in-law and started yelling, I held my ground. She insisted I leave the apartment, claiming it wasn't fair for me to live there while they stayed in the old house. She seemed to think my son James was paying the rent, which explained her frequent visits. In her mind, the apartment should have been for her family, so I agreed to leave within 3 days. Jessica demanded I call a moving company in front of her to prove my intentions. I immediately arranged for movers to come in 2 days, satisfying her. As she left, satisfied with her victory, I began formulating a plan. I moved out as promised, settling into a senior apartment for a trial period of 2 weeks. I handed over the keys and lease documents to Jessica, asking for a contract change through the real estate agent, who was accommodating due to our long-standing relationship. Meanwhile, my eldest son was furious with Jessica for kicking me out, even considering divorce, but she seemed indifferent. Surprisingly, Jessica decided to live alone in my apartment, declaring her independence. I marveled at her audacity. However, in 5 days, Jessica would learn the truth. While working remotely, I anticipated Jessica's call. I had a recorder ready to capture our conversation. When she called, I deliberately stayed calm, irritating her further. She complained about the rent, assuming James was supposed to pay it. When my son corrected her and urged her to call me, it became clear she didn't know the truth. In reality, I had been financially supporting James since retiring. I continued working at the company as a consultant while also providing industry advice as an advisor, earning a good salary. With my experience, I made more money than my eldest son. Secretly, I'd been helping him financially because Jessica's spending habits put him in a tough spot. Jessica thought my son was paying the rent for the apartment, but it was actually me. When I clarified this to her, she seemed shocked. After our call, I shared the recorded conversation with my son, who was worn out from dealing with Jessica's debts. He agreed to divorce her. I laid out a plan for him. Take a few days off work, discreetly move his important stuff out of the apartment without Jessica noticing, and find a new place to live. Over the next few days, my son followed the plan. He moved his belongings quietly, ensuring Jessica didn't suspect anything. He sent her belongings to her parents' house and put their house up for sale, leaving it empty. When Jessica called in a panic, I calmly handled her questions. It turned out she couldn't afford the rent on her own, so I had to leave. I decided to talk to James about the situation. When I returned home, I found chains and a padlock on the gate, along with a for sale sign. Jessica was almost hysterical when she arrived. I calmly told her that I had already finalized a sales contract with a realtor, and we couldn't access the house anymore. I took the opportunity to address a few things that had been bothering me. Firstly, I made it clear that I was no longer her mother-in-law Yesterday, James had filed for divorce, something she had signed off on a while ago. It seemed threatening divorce was a habit of hers, but my son had finally seen through it and submitted the papers. I reminded Jessica that she had always said she could divorce James any time. Now it had happened. On the phone, I sensed Jessica's frustration as she struggled to respond. She vented her anger, cursing me and blaming her marriage to my son on the inheritance left by my late husband. She claimed I controlled all the money, leaving her with nothing to show for it. I let James listen to her tirade, planning to use the recording as evidence in a divorce settlement. After her outburst, Jessica broke down, begging for help. She revealed that her parents had disowned her due to her reckless spending and borrowing habits. She pleaded with me to assist her, admitting that something had felt off at the wedding, a realization that finally clicked for me. It was strange from the start, Jessica having nowhere to go after the fallout. While I felt a twinge of sympathy, I saw it as a consequence of her actions. Apologies wouldn't change things. We were strangers now, with nothing left to discuss. I wished her luck and ended the call, feeling a sense of relief afterward. However, Jessica's troubles didn't end there. She caused quite a commotion at my son's workplace, leading to the police being called. When she returned to the apartment she had been squatting in, she found the locks changed by the landlord, leaving her locked out. She tried to reach out to us, but we had changed our numbers and didn't share our new address. Desperate, she turned to her disowned family, only to find herself rejected. Her belongings were left out in the rain, and she wasn't even allowed inside. The unpaid rent for the apartment had been billed to her parents, adding to their anger. Rumor has it that she's now staying in a support organization's apartment for the homeless. Seeing her on the street, she seemed stressed and overwhelmed by her circumstances. Seeing Jessica, I was taken aback by how much she had changed. Her hair had turned white, and her skin looked dry. She seemed like a different person altogether. It made me realize the profound impact living conditions can have on someone. Meanwhile, I started a new chapter in the house I purchased with my late husband's inheritance. It's a duplex, so my son has the option to remarry whenever he wants. He joins me for dinner, but otherwise, he takes care of his own affairs. This level of distance feels just right. The money from selling my parents' home is saved for future needs. I plan to use it to support my son and his future wife, and of course, to spoil any future grandchildren. I've even been thinking of creating the English garden I've always dreamed of in my new home. On days when I don't work, I find solace in the garden, tending to the young trees and herbs. This new life, filled with hope